Bikes are brilliant. They're a fun, clean and efficient way to travel around urban areas and commute as well. And there's an added bonus, they make you fitter. But as many of you will know, they can be a very attractive target to thieves, or as I like to call them, to try and stop your pride and joy becoming the victim of thieves, we've teamed up with Kryptonite. So in this video, we're going to go through the do's and don'ts of bike security. Whether you're commuting to work or just popping to the shops or visiting friends, we're going to go through how and where best to lock up your bike, how best to use locks to secure your bike, and also the different types of locks so that you can determine what's best for your needs. Bike locks come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and the different types have relative advantages and disadvantages. Also, bigger isn't always necessarily better. Now, before we go into the specifics of how and where to lock up your bike, I'm going to go through the different types of lock that are available. Bike locks are often graded in terms of their unbreakability. Yep, that's a word I just made up, but you get the point. For example, Kryptonite grades its locks between 1 and 10, 1 being the least secure kind of lock they make, and 10 being, yeah, the best of the best, the absolute gold standard in bike lock security. Now, all the locks we have here start at 5, but you can see on the packaging the security rating is labelled on there. Something that's less than 5 would typically be used as a sort of just a slight countermeasure if you were stopping at a cafe in a rural location, or perhaps just to secure your bike if you were travelling on, say, a train or something like that. The first type of lock to be aware of is the D-lock. They range from something like this, a basic D-lock designed for use in a rural area, to this, an absolute beast of a D-lock designed to stop the most notorious thieves in a major metropolitan area. Think of Gotham City after Bane has taken over, and you've got the right kind of idea. Also, we've got a few in between as well. Anyway, D-locks are regarded as the strongest and most secure bike locks you can use, and they vary in strength and sort of, well, durability and solidness and weight and a few other features as well, and this is reflected in the price. So something like this is more expensive than something that's lighter and less durable, this. D-locks also vary in size, so you get small ones like this and bigger ones like this, and they're designed to either lock your bike to an immovable object or to lock, say, your frame to another part of the bike, such as wheels or panniers. And a common tactic, and it's a good tactic, is to use a D-lock in combination with another lock, such as a cable lock, to secure other parts of the bike, such as wheels and, well, whatever you've got on your bike. Speaking of which, cable locks are another popular type of bike lock. They are generally lighter than a D-lock, meaning they can be a bit more appealing for traveling around and lugging in a backpack, but they're less secure. Now, they come with different locking mechanisms. You can get them with combination locks on them or key locks, or ones with loops on like this that are designed to be used with another lock, usually a D-lock. Cable locks can stop an opportunist thief, but they are much less secure than a D-lock, and bolt cutters will make quick work of a cable lock. They're usually a steel cable, such as this, with a kind of plastic coating on the outside to help prevent corrosion. Next, we have chain locks. Guess what they're made from? Well, again, they have different locking mechanisms. This one has a combination lock on it, but there's also ones with just keys as well. And they come in a range of different shapes, sizes, and strengths. They're generally more secure than a cable lock, but less strong than a D-lock. They do, however, have the added advantage over a D-lock that they can be a bit more maneuverable because of it's a chain at wrapping round and securing different parts of your bike, whereas because the D-lock is sort of static and rigid, that can sometimes be a bit more difficult. Another type of lock we have, which is less common than the others we've shown you, is a folding lock. We've got one here. Now, folding locks can be pretty useful because they can take up less space in your bag when you're transporting them than a D-lock because they fold down. And again, this can be really useful depending on where you're locking your bike up and what kind of bike you're locking up. They're regarded as being more secure than a cable, but once again, less secure than the trusty D-lock. This is because while they can resist bolt cutters very well, a tungsten tipped saw or angle grinder can make short work of them. At the higher end of locks, you'll see features like thicker hardened steel shackles, double deadlocks, and higher pick-resistant lock barrels, as well as smaller openings in the locks themselves. All these things make it harder for someone to break the lock using brute force or to lever it open. At the lower end, these features are pared down slightly. That's not to say the locks don't work, but they are less resistant to a skilled thief or higher brute force, using narrower gauge steel and smaller lock barrels. The lock or locks you use depends on a number of factors. So, the type of bike that you have, where it is that you're going to be locking it up, the time of day or night, and also how long you're planning to leave it for. All these factors contribute to the amount of risk associated with how likely your bike is to be stolen. Location is really important. Certain areas can be bike theft hotspots, such as train stations, and we'd also recommend that you'd avoid, if possible, putting your bike in a quiet side street such as this, because in a quieter area with less people around, it can often give the thief potentially more time to work on the bike. Consider other things too, such as, is there CCTV where you're locking up your bike? This can often act as a deterrent to thieves. Areas where there's lots of footfall and people either sat at cafes or walking around that are busier can also be a deterrent. And think about unconventional locations to lock your bike. So these railings are a good example. I'm going to lock my bike to them, not on this side, but on the other side, overhanging onto where there's a road. This kind of location is going to make the bike much more difficult to work on for a thief and makes it a much less appealing target. There's also, in this location, a security guard that's placed over there. He's there most of the day, and there's a chance that if a thief were working on the bike, he might notice it as well. So all things like this make your bike a less attractive target. This is going to be quite an unattractive location for someone to try and work on this bike, and also a subtle detail. I've put the actual lock where the key goes on this side and not on this side. Subtle detail, but it makes it that little bit more difficult to work on the lock if you were going to try and pick it. Always lock your bike to an object that can't be cut. I mean, it sounds obvious, but a wooden post might look nice and secure, but a saw will make short work of it. Around here, we've got a number of options. So you've got like a drain pipe. Some people sometimes lock their bikes to drain pipes, but again, they can be cut quite easily, and if they're plastic, you can just simply rip them away from the wall if you really want to. We've got a lamp post here. Lamp posts can actually be really solid and a decent thing to lock your bike to, but it can be at risk from being damaged by people just walking past it and knocking into it. There's also some classic Georgian railings over here, which are made from cast iron. Now these are okay, but again, an angle grinder or a saw will make short work of these. This is much easier to cut through than the hardened steel that you'll get on a good quality D-lock. I'm now going to show you how best to lock your bike up and the technique that I would use, and there's a few tips that will make it more secure. So firstly, this is a good area. It's a nice street. It's not, there's not many signs of criminal activity. Also lots of footfall. It's well lit and lots of people around, and we've got dedicated bike railings here which are really nice and secure, and no one's going to be able to just lift the bike off this like if it was a bollard or a tree stump that they could cut or something like that. I'm going to lock the bike in order of its sort of value of the respective parts. The frame being the most valuable part, followed by the rear wheel and then the front wheel. So you want to secure in this order if possible. And I'm going to use a D-lock to secure both the frame and the rear wheel. With the D-lock placed through the rear wheel and the frame, I'm also going to use a cable lock as a secondary measure to help secure the front wheel as well. So simply passing that through the D-lock shackle through the frame and then through the front wheel and then back into the D-lock like so. Next, gonna put the end of the D-lock back on, and ideally, if you can, you position the locking mechanism of the D-lock pointing down, as that will make it harder to work on. Also, this is where I talk about bigger's not always better. If you have a massive D-lock that was then going to be quite loose on where you're locking your bike, that can allow space for people to get, or thieves to get tools in so that they can prise the D-lock open. And you want minimal space between where you're locking your bike and the bike itself. And that's why smaller, more compact D-locks, such as this one, can come in handy in those situations. It sounds obvious, and to many of you it will be obvious, but I have seen people lock their bikes in this way. They attach it to what appears to be a really solid object that's just immovable and is not going anywhere, but they lock it in a way that makes the bike not secure at all. Classic example is something like this sort of bollard that's sticking up. You can just, locking it like this, you're just going to lift it straight off. Right, I'm away with the bike now. See you later. In addition to using a cable, or perhaps instead of using a cable, you could use another type of lock to secure the front wheel to the frame. This could be a D-lock or a chain lock or whatever you like. But again, don't put it through this way with the lock facing upwards. That makes it easier to work on. Instead, put it downwards like that. Generally speaking, the more locks the better, and it makes your bike less appealing to thieves. And if you're going to be locking your bike up in the same place every day, such as at a work location, then you can actually leave locks like this, just simply locked to the bike racking down the bottom. That way you don't have to lug them on your commute every time, because locks like this are very secure, but they are quite heavy. They do have special covers on them that you can slide across to stop water ingress and damage to the lock from weather as well, which makes them ideal for this kind of purpose. You may notice that some locks come with a second rating in addition to the manufacturer's own strength rating, and this is Sold Secure. Sold Secure is a third-party testing and certification body that rates locks based on its own standards. Because of this, it's often the only rating that's recognised by insurers. In summary, it's all about weighing up, how you want to lock your bike, what locks you're prepared to carry with you, how secure you want it to be, and where you're going to be leaving it. If you weigh up all the points that we've discussed in this video, you should be well on your way to properly securing your bike. That said, no amount of locks is going to stop a really determined thief. So with that in mind, if your bike is super valuable, I'd think twice before locking it up in a public space. For example, if you've got really expensive components on your bike, it doesn't matter if the wheels and frame are secured, because the thieves might just strip off the components off your bike and leave you with the wheels and frame left behind. The aim of the game is to try and make your bike as unappealing to thieves as possible, and kind of think of it a bit like lions chasing antelope. You don't need to be invincible to lions, you just need to not be the weakest antelope. And another tip, if you are going to be picking a bike that you're going to be using in an urban environment and locking up, it's a good idea to have a bike that is less valuable. It's just a tool for getting from A to B. Sticking with the antelope analogy, you don't want your bike to be the plumpest, tastiest looking antelope. Nothing too flash. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it informative, and armed with these tips you'll hopefully be able to make your bike more secure and less vulnerable to thieves. If you haven't, please give it a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what videos you'd like to see in the future and your own bike locking security tips. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Oh, for